Once upon a time, in a land not so far away, there were these German teenagers during the Third Reich. Now, if you asked anyone about them, they'd go, "Oh yeah, they joined the Hitler Youth, no doubt." And hey, they wouldn't be entirely wrong. Hitler's Youth was like a compulsory membership club for boys and the BDM for the girls between 14 and 18 years old. BDM is Bund Deutscher Mädel. Yeah, it's hard to pronounce, but guess what? Some of these rebellious teens found sneaky ways to avoid joining the party and even resisted becoming true believers in Hitler's messed-up system. Now that's what I call teenage rebellion with a twist. Before the age of Hitler, there were all sorts of young people groups in Germany. The Wandervögel, or Wandering Birds, were quite the famous bunch. They'd go on nature trips, camping, making music, singing, and having a blast. Many groups were just for boys at first, but then more and more girls were allowed in. These young Germans were not just playing around, they discussed politics, culture, art, and other fancy stuff. But of course, when Hitler's party-pooping reign started, he broke up these cool clubs faster than a hipster can say, "Art avocado toast." As you can imagine, doing anything against the Nazi party was like playing with fire while wearing a gasoline suit. If you got caught in one of these anti-Nazi groups, you'd end up in court, paying fines or, in some cases, landing yourself a comfy spot in jail. And it only got worse as Hitler's grip tightened and the war went on. Many poor kids were brutally treated, tortured, imprisoned, or even shipped off to join the punishment battalion. Talk about a lousy summer camp option. And what did some of these young rebels do to earn themselves a ticket to jail? Believe it or not, just by listening to music or reading books that the Nazis put on their no-no list. I guess it was like being thrown into prison for enjoying a little pop culture. But hey, you know what they say, if you can't stand the German music, stay out of the Third Reich. Now, let me introduce you to the heroes of our story, the White Rose. These brave souls were like the Avengers of World War II, but without the flashy suits and powers. They were 5 students and a professor who decided to fight against the Nazi regime. They grew up in families that cherished learning, curiosity, and that touch of humanistianity. So, of course, they were the perfect match for a rebellious clique. Legend has it that the name White Rose came from a couple of poems that used the flower as a symbol of purity and innocence. Our heroes, Hans, Sophie, Christoph, Willi, Alexander, and Professor Kurt, were all German patriots, but they weren't exactly buying what Hitler was selling. They had many questions and criticisms about the Nazi regime, and the big boss himself. Turns out, Hans even had a brief gig as a banner-bearer at a Nazi rally. But you know what they say, don't judge a book by its swastika-covered cover. Hans and Alexander had seen some pretty messed-up stuff on the Eastern Front, and it opened their eyes to the harsh reality of the Nazi regime. The mistreatment of Poles and Jews was just the tip of the iceberg. They couldn't stand idly by while such horrors were taking place. So they decided to write some thought-provoking leaflets to stir up their fellow Germans who secretly despised Hitler, but were too afraid to say or do anything about it. Between March and July 1942, the White Rose Group wrote 4 powerful leaflets, which they distributed undercover like secret agents in the wee hours of the morning. When the sleepy students and staff arrived, they were greeted with leaflets that exposed the truth about the Nazis, and a call to listen to their conscience. Little did they know that owning or using a printer without permission in Nazi Germany was a crime straight out of a comedy sketch. The first lines of the first White Rose leaflet were like a poetic mic drop. Nothing is more shameful to a civilized nation than to allow itself to be governed by an irresponsible clique of sovereigns who have given themselves over to dark urges, and that without resisting. Isn't it true that every honest German is ashamed of his government these days? Oh, snap, they didn't hold back. The second leaflet pulled no punches either. It called out the massacre of Jews in Poland and highlighted the atrocities committed against these human beings. These brave souls were way ahead of their time, standing up for justice and human rights when it mattered most. Their leaflets spread like wildfire, with people copying them by hand or secretly printing them all over Western Germany. It was like the OG version of viral sharing. But alas, not everyone was on board with these daring rebels. Some people were too scared or too loyal to the regime to resist. They turned in the leaflets to the dreaded Gestapo, like turning in a stolen cookie jar to your mum. Between July 1942 and January 1943, the White Rose Group went silent. They had some valid concerns about staying undercover and not ending up in a Nazi-themed escape room. But then Stalingrad happened. That's when many Germans started realizing that defeat was on the horizon. Even the most loyal Nazis couldn't ignore the lies and propaganda anymore. At the Ludwig Maximilian University, where our heroes studied, something unusual went down. It was like a rare unicorn sighting, an anti-government riot. On that fateful day, Paul Giesler, a regional Nazi party leader, was doing his typical Nazi spiel to an unwilling crowd. The students, who were wise to his nonsense, started jeering and booing like they were heckling a bad comedian. Giesler decided to make some sexist remarks about women belonging at home with their families and husbands. Well, that didn't sit well with the fierce ladies in the balcony. They leaned over, mocking him like sassy queens, and chaos ensued. Fistfights broke out between students and SS men, and the Nazis had to retreat like they were running away from a wasp nest. Seeing this protest gave the White Rose members hope. They knew they had a more receptive audience now. They'd spent the past few months honing their message with the help of their favorite professor, Dr. Huber. This anti-Nazi mastermind had been walking a tightrope between his academic career and a one-way ticket to a concentration camp. Their final leaflets spoke of a Germany and Europe without Hitler and the Nazis. Dr. Huber wrote about the tragedy of Stalingrad, and Christoph Probst denounced the misguided and evil Führer. He even praised Franklin Roosevelt, the most powerful man in the world. You can imagine how the Nazis reacted to that. The White Rose decided to take their message to the university on February 18, 1943. They left their leaflets outside the lecture hall and waited for fate to do its thing. But oh no, Sophie accidentally left a few leaflets behind, and a janitor spotted them. It was like a comedy of errors, except there was no laughing involved. The siblings got caught and were hauled off to face the music. A few weeks later, the core members of the White Rose Group were arrested, along with some other students who agreed to help distribute the leaflets. The trial was like a reality show from hell, hosted by Judge Roland Freisler, the Nazi version of Simon Cowell. Freisler tried to intimidate our brave heroes, but they sat there, cool as cucumbers, listening to his histrionics. They knew what was coming, the death sentence. Sophie had the last word, saying, "Somebody, after all, had to make a start. What we wrote and said is also believed by many others. They just don't dare express themselves as we did." Talk about a mic drop moment. And so our heroes were led to their fateful end, one by one, facing the guillotine. Sophie's last words were profound, with two versions reported: "God, my refuge into eternity," or "The sun still shines." Hans bid farewell with a powerful message: "Let freedom live." Later on, Dr. Huber, Alexander Schmorl, and Willy Graf were arrested. Willy was tortured but didn't give up any names. All three were executed after a sham trial overseen by Freisler. The rest of the White Rose members were sent to prison. Since the end of World War II, these brave souls and the White Rose have symbolized freedom and resistance in Germany. They're like the German version of the Avengers, but instead of superpowers, they had courage and conviction. 3 cheers for the rebels who dared to challenge evil. And that's all. If you have other video suggestions, let me know in the comment section. See you next time.